It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a Republican political strategist who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. John Thomas, welcome.
Hey, John, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by.
No
Let's get into the gubernatorial election here first, because I've got to tell you, one of the reasons that we all study history in school is because history tends to repeat itself, and you want to learn from your mistakes, and you want to try not to repeat them. In this election, the Democrats were almost entirely willing to get behind Eric Swalwell when he was a candidate for governor because they thought he would have the best chance at finishing in first place and keeping a Democrat lockout from happening on the November ballot. He didn't really know much about California politics. He didn't really seem interested in learning about California politics, but he was well known because he is a foil to Donald Trump, and that was good enough for them. And then all the negative stories broke about all the rape allegations and sexual harassment and mistreating people, misusing money, the whole thing. And we find out the guy's a complete dirtbag. Even Stephen Klubeck kicked him out of his house. Mm-hmm. And what do the Democrats do? Instead of trying to learn from their mistake and figure out where they went wrong in their evaluation of this candidate, they jump headfirst in with Javier Becerra, a guy with more red flags than a golf course, a guy who the Biden administration is saying was the worst pick that Joe made his entire 4 years as president. He is a guy whose chief of staff is cutting a deal with the feds after he was accused of stealing and not paying the IRS. Dana Williamson is being charged by the feds with a crime, and it looks like she's cutting a deal with them. And it seems like they don't seem to care or seem to be too concerned with all of these storm clouds on the horizon. And it's looking to me like Eric Swalwell 2.0. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's incredible. First of all, the fact that in a state as deeply blue as California, that candidates like Swalwell and Javier Becerra are the best they have to offer is really quite pathetic and shocking. And the second is, I hear what you're saying, John, about history, that they should learn from it. But let's also look at the recent presidential election where they cooed Joe Biden and slammed in his vice president without having the proper thought of perhaps forcing Joe Biden to have a competitive primary and perhaps finding a more viable national Democrat rather than the incompetent and idiotic and feckless Kamala Harris, who ended up obviously losing to President Trump. So this is somewhat consistent. And I also think that Democrats are so blinded by their identity politics that also causes them often to not look beyond the surface. And so they're going to get Javier Becerra taking over at a time that California is in deep crisis. So not only do you need a competent Democrat, but you need a Democrat who isn't corrupt. And so it looks like they're going to be California may be, quite frankly, longing for the days of Gavin Newsom, because at least he's just your standard issue San Francisco liberal. Javier Becerra is like just Joe Biden a few years younger.
Well, when you look at the possibilities of what could happen, we know that everyone in this guy's inner circle is now in trouble with the feds. So it is entirely within the realm of possibilities that this guy could get indicted after the primary, and then suddenly you have someone who might go to federal prison as your nominee. What do you do then? My guess is they stand behind him because they rather deal with a Democratic criminal than a Republican. What do you do if he gets elected, becomes governor, and then gets indicted? You have a guy who is essentially impotent as governor, won't be able to do any of the things that you want him to do because he'll be under a federal cloud. All of the possibilities that they have coming up with Javier Becerra are bad. And let's say he doesn't get indicted. You're going to end up with a guy who, based on past performance, will likely be a very poor governor, and you're going to rely on that guy to lead the state?
Well, particularly at a time of of broad economic crisis within the state. Yeah, you're exactly right. I think the other kind of story here as it relates to the candidates, John, is that although I don't know that the Democratic establishment thought too deeply about their backing of Javier Becerra, other than he's not Tom Steyer, and Tom, doesn't play well with the Democratic establishment. I think really it's the establishment trying to run more broadly from all the other candidates, John. I mean, yes, Javier may be a bad governor, an ineffective governor, but the establishment hates Katie Porter. They can't stand to be in a room with Katie Porter. They would take somebody who's incompetent over her any day of the week. And quite frankly, a similar thing with Steyer. So I wonder if it's more that Becerra was just the least bad alternative in a time when they got caught flat-footed, because Swalwell was obviously bounced out.
You debate a lot of Democratic strategists on cable, on radio, different forums. Mm-hmm. When the cameras aren't on and you're talking to them about Katie Porter, what do they say?
I have yet to meet a single Democratic strategist, state, local, or national, that thinks highly of her. It's really, they all just want her to go home, go back to teaching or whatever she wants to do. They personally detest her, and I think they're all going to be. Actually, I know they're all going to be quite relieved when she very likely will not prevail in this race. And what is that? 2 back-to-back losses, and her old seat was kind of carved away. So they're all relieved. The only person I believe that likes Katie Porter would be Elizabeth Warren. I think she's her protege, but outside of that, Katie's finding herself without a home.
When I talk to Democrats, not only do they not like her, they all seem to have unique Katie Porter stories where she did something to them. Mm-hmm. She was nasty to them. She was nasty to someone in front of them. She did something vulgar, whatever. They all have stories, every single one that I talk to.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because politics is a team sport. It doesn't mean that you can't ruffle feathers. Look, President Trump goes toe-to-toe with people all the time. But he also is very loyal and knows how to get along with people to get things done. Katie Porter doesn't get along with anybody. She's in it for herself, and that's simply it. Her whole thing during Congress was to try to make a ruckus, to try to embarrass a CEO that would come in front of oversight. And then she used that clip to get her on MSNBC simply so that she could take that clip and put it in her email machine and keep dumb, low-information voters keep giving her $5 a month. And that worked pretty effectively to put together a war chest. But the problem is, John, it's one thing to run for Congress. The electorate doesn't get to know you that well because it's pretty much your TV ads and your mail pieces. But when you run for governor in a big state like this, yes, paid advertising is important, but you've got to build traditional coalitions. And if you have slashed and burned everybody along the way, there's going to be nobody there to stand with you. And that's, why she's imploding, quite frankly.
What do you make of the fact that there seems to be no genuine interest at all within the Democratic Party electorate for Matt Mahan, who is, by all accounts, the sanest of all of the Democratic candidates running for governor? He certainly wants to do something about crime. He wants to do something about the homeless problem. He doesn't want to spend the state into bankruptcy, but he's with them on all the social issues that they care about. He hates Donald Trump, and it doesn't matter. They're not buying that product.
That actually is the most interesting story that I don't think is being covered about this gubernatorial race, which is that moderate Democrats are completely rejected by both the establishment and the electorate in blue states like California. That is just shocking that they're looking for positions at the extremes. And Matt Mahan, he's floundered. The only people that have gotten excited about him are kind of, quite frankly, the ultra wealthy and Silicon Valley elites. Like, that's about it. He never was resonant with the electorate. And I think in part, John, it's because intensity in these races is generated with Democrats at the extreme. Who is the most anti-Trump? Who is the most woke? And Mahan's positions don't generate any excitement or intensity right now. He's not partisan enough. And so forget the race in California. I think as we project, as we look into the midterm cycle, and then, of course, as we look into the next presidential cycle, this may be foreshadowing of what the Democratic primary race looks like, that a moderate governor from some flyover state may not actually be quite viable in 2028. They may be looking for somebody more like an AOC to carry the torch.
Oh, yeah. This is horrendous news for Josh Shapiro or Rahm Emanuel or Andy Bashar. I can't see that type of candidate winning a Democratic primary right now.
I struggle to see it. I know the Democratic elites, the donors will probably give them plenty of money. So, you can't totally discount it. But I struggle to see it. They're going to splice up whatever small slice of the electorate. But really, they're just not going to generate a lot of attention because primary is about generating attention and intensity. And, somebody like AOC, John, probably starts out with, I don't know, mid to high 20s and in support. And her voters are not leaving her. So all she has to do is hang on to her voters and maybe pick up a couple points here or there. And heck, she can ride this thing out. So it's just really bad news for Democrats, and it's good news for Republicans if they're thinking about breaking the historical trend of holding the White House after two terms in power.
Do you think Becerra has seen enough of a bump to prevent the Democrats from being locked off the November ballot?
I do. Yeah. I mean, look, strange things do happen, but I look at polling. Polling's a snapshot in time, of course, but I really are looking kind of at consolidation trends. And it seems to be the Democrats are kind of getting in line broadly behind Becerra. And Steyer has been falling back. And interestingly, his attacks and whatnot kind of he's reached saturation point where his advertising really has marginal utility for each dollar that he spends. And in fact, every time it says paid for by Tom Steyer, it reinforces kind of the Democratic electorate's disdain for rich guys. So Tom seems to be falling back far enough. If he were closing at a faster rate, I would say, hey, maybe there could be two Republicans. But, President Trump's endorsement of Steve Hilton seems to consolidate the Republicans, and kind of Democrats are getting in line more broadly with Becerra. So I think it will be an R&D going in. But look, I think the big wild card is what you said, John. Does some bad DOJ news break about Javier Becerra in a runoff? Because that could tilt this thing in some kind of black swan event towards Steve Hilton.
What do you think Tom Steyer does next? Because he ran for president, spent a ton of money and lost. He's running for governor, spending a ton of money, gonna lose. Do you think he just goes away at this point, or do you think he spends the rest of his life running to win something?
I was thinking about this morning, actually. And on the one hand, it's completely idiotic about how much money this guy has wasted in just perennially running and losing. On the other hand, and while I completely disagree with his policies and world viewpoint, I actually kind of respect it in a way, John, that he's a man in the arena. He gets in the fight. At least he has no shot, but at least he's trying to do something, juxtaposed to other billionaires like Rick Caruso who just don't have the stuff to go through it again. So I tend to think his days in electoral politics, Tom Steyer days, are over. But I think he's going to turn this and leverage it into some kind of appointment if the Democrats take the White House. I just have to think that he's going to convert, not just the name ID, but also he's given a lot of influencers within the Democratic Party a lot of money. So he's going to try to convert that into an appointment. If Tom Steyer runs for president again, I don't know. I guess I'll eat my hat. But I guess at that point, he just loves burning money. I really have no other explanation for it.
What the hell is going on with Rick Caruso? You mentioned his name. he got behind Matt Mahan in a big way. Matt Mahan is not going to win this election. And now it looks like Caruso might get in trouble because there was coordination between one of the independent groups and the campaign, or at least an allegation of that. And they're looking into that right now. So people might get in trouble over that. He's getting behind a challenger to Brad Sherman, the longtime congressman from the San Fernando Valley, who is attacking him from the left. He has certainly got behind other candidates that make no sense to me. He won't endorse or hasn't endorsed Spencer Pratt, who is catching fire right now in that LA mayor's race. He's only going after Nithya Raman, so I assume he's going to endorse Karen Bass in the general election if it's Bass and Pratt. As soon as he started taking advice from Democratic consultants, A, what he did made no sense to anyone, and B, he went from being the guy with the Midas touch to being a guy who can't win anything.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you expect Rick to step up and use his voice to do the right thing, like endorsing Spencer Pratt, he remains silent. When he has no business getting involved in a race like the one against Brad Sherman, he speaks up and he's backing a loser. Because he didn't run for mayor, he didn't run for governor, and it was such a bizarre lead up, by the way, right? He was on a electoral tour, essentially, saying an announcement's coming, and then only to pull the trigger and pull back was odd. And that meant that if Rick Caruso endorsed in the race for governor, politically speaking, he needed to back a winner. He could not take a long shot. And so the fact that he got all in behind Matt Mahan, and I saw some messaging, John, he put out on Twitter where it was a little disingenuous, where he was saying, oh, Matt Mahan's on the rise, he's overtaking. He was in fifth place at the time. I mean, there was no pathway at that time. Look, I think any shred of political capital that Rick Caruso had after this coming election cycle is probably gone. I thought what he could have become when he decided not to run, although I do think he should have given it a shot in the LA mayor's race, but when he decided not to run, I thought perhaps he could be like an elder statesman, the voice of reason, who just did the right thing by getting behind the right people at the right time. And it's a hodgepodge. I think it's bad political advice and instincts, a desire to be liked. And what's going to end up happening is his political capital is eroding, and people who should be listening to Rick's advice are just going to discount it, and he's been more and more irrelevant as time goes on.
John Thomas, Republican political strategist, who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. Thanks so much for stopping by. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, John. You too.